So we're here at Barber Motorsports Park in Birmingham, Alabama, and we're just going to fire a few questions at Dale and see what interesting facts he comes back with. So Dale, just give us a bit of a brief insight into your motorcycling history and how you got into motorcycling, how you got into racing, and what's brought you here to where we are today.
Well, for me it started in 1963. I was an American GI in Japan. And up to that point, I didn't like motorcycles at all and didn't have much care for anybody that liked motorcycles. But it was the only transportation there, so I bought one. 2 weeks later, I went to my first race as a racer and fell in love with it.
Wow.
And I think I fell down 16 times in that first race. And then the bike finally quit. It was probably the only thing that saved me. All the Japanese spectators were having a heyday watching this big dumb American boy falling down all the time. But boy, the hook got in me really quick, and luckily I got a little better than that fairly quickly and raced in Japan for 2 years and loved it. Came back from Japan and raced another year as an amateur, and then I turned pro and stayed pro for 8 years, where I had an injury that ended my pro career, but I went back to amateur for about another 15 years. But I kind of got out of the racing for a while as I was raising the family. I have one son and one daughter. And when I retired from teaching, I thought, I've got a little unfinished business. I'd raced at Daytona and finished one position out of the money, and it always aggravated me. I thought, I'm going to go back and do something there. So I got started with this vintage stuff, and I happened to run into Wes Orloff, who rides for me normally, and we kind of hooked up a partnership and been doing it for 17 years, and it's been a good ride.
Moving on to present day, you've got these bikes, these CR450s. This is the one I'm riding here, this is number 74. So we're in Premier 500, aren't we? Or is it Formula 500?
It's called the Premier 500 here.
Right. What's the difference?
For me, the Premier is the only class I was interested in. I wanted, if you win the Premier, you've got something to brag about.
Right.
If you win the GP 500, yeah, it's a nice race, but come up with the big boys, and we don't beat them all the time, but we win a few, and usually on the box every time. So we usually represent ourselves pretty well.
Cool.
But yeah, basically the 500cc motorcycles, we're allowed a little overboard, so we can go up to about 520 really. The bike you're on is about a 518cc.
Okay. Yeah.
5-speed transmission. Outside of the cases and the castings for the cylinder head, there's not much of the original bike there. Everything else is pretty well homemade or some supplier that I can buy from.
You made reference to it yesterday. This is a Sealy chassis, isn't it?
Correct.
So explain to us what brought you to go down the Sealy chassis route.
Well, my friends in Illinois run a business called Frame Crafters, and that's what they do, is make frames primarily for vintage bikes and racing bikes. And one day my friend Randy asked me, he says, Dale, we'd like to build you a frame. And he says, and at no cost to you. And I said, well, what's the downside here? And his idea was to move the engine forward a couple inches to load up the front wheel some more. And ironically, I had just been thinking about building a new frame for myself with pretty much the same plan. So I said, yeah, I'll go ahead and do it. And so he built the Sealy for me, and he built the frame and tank, and I built everything else for it. And turned out to be a pretty successful bike. We've had some really good runs on it. And you've ridden both of them, so you could probably attest there's a pretty small difference between them. I don't know if you could get a tenth of a second a lap between them on any particular given day.
One question I've got to ask, and this is closer to home for me, is did you ever consider coming and doing the Isle of Man TT?
I've been asked a couple times to do that. And I always thinking, boy, that's a lot of time and a lot of work. I'm not sure how many laps that thing will run on the Isle of Man. I might have to detune them a hair. I'm not sure. But no, I haven't seriously thought about it. No.
Yeah. But in terms of your own career, did it ever cross your mind to do it yourself?
When I was young and still racing in Japan, I would have cut off my foot, to get a chance to race the Isle of Man. I thought that would have been the greatest thing in the world. And then I meet people like you, and I'm thinking, what the hell was I thinking? But at the time, yeah, I would have loved to have ridden there.
Yeah.
Jim Redmond and Mike Halewood were my heroes above all. I was a huge fan of the TT. That was the event of the year. There was nothing that tested man and machine better than the TT.
Yeah.
And the sporting value was just beyond anything. Most of my competitors that I knew had the same opinion. And you got to remember too, in the 60s, none of us really knew a lot about safety in those days. Safety has come so far with the riding gear that you ride with now compared to what I rode with, one single layer of calf skin, and a pudding bow helmet, but I've always been a huge fan of the TT and still am.
Yeah. Well, thanks for answering a few questions, giving an insight into the life of Dale Coffman, and myself, Fred Torpedo. We're really grateful for the opportunity. So, yeah, we'll have a lot of fun tomorrow and Sunday.
Well, for me, I love it.